bio, the abstract. But I just wanted to say welcome to Yasmin. And as you know from the flyer that's been going around, Yasmin comes to us from, she's a professor of learning sciences from the University of Pennsylvania. And what prompted Suzanne and I to bring Yasmin to UOIT was, when I first came back to work at least, was from Rado and Bowler's DIY statistic book. And your chapter just happens to be the one right after Suzanne's.
Oh!
So I was reading Suzanne's chapter and I thought, oh, I'll just keep reading. And Yasmin wrote a really nice chapter with Kylie Pepler on being creative and critical and connected with e-textiles, which is something that I'm really interested in my work. And that prompted me, of course, to get a few more books. And so this is the one that Yasmin is going to be really focusing on today. So Connected Code, Why Children Need to Learn Programming. And I was explaining to Yasmin that this is going to be a part of our fourth semester BEd program when we talk about with the students coding and communication. So we're really fortunate to have you here, and I hope you'll find her work as intriguing as I do, and please join me in welcoming Yasmin Kafai.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I mean, Suzanne and I go back many, many decades, not just years, in the early 90s, connecting around interests of girls and games, which in the early 90s made a big splash, because up to that point people didn't believe that girls were actually interested in computers, let alone games. And then Barbie Fashion Designer came around. Now I know it's Barbie, but Barbie Fashion Designer, let me assure you, is a really cool package, and I can argue with Suzanne up to the gazoo, because this was 1995. It was a best-selling package. It beat out all the Nintendo and Sega cartridges. And you were able to design your own clothes for Barbie. And then Barbie would do a 3D catwalk animation, which on those IBM PCs was a true feat of technology. And then you would print it out on special paper, which felt like fabric, and you would glue it together, and then you could play with the clothes. It was very unique. All of the other Barbie stuff is not that interesting, but a Barbie Fashion Designer. And it highlighted a big turning point. It also highlighted, I mean, the closure of when people were interested in programming, which is the talk of what I will focus on today, because multimedia CD-ROMs came along, the internet came, and people thought, oh, we don't need to learn programming anymore because we know how to interact and communicate with the machine. And here we are 20 years later. Peter and I just talked about those old days, and it's very interesting to be at a time point when you see a topic which has literally gone away from education, making a 180-degree comeback. And so Connected Code is, I mean, my attempt to connect back to the past, and not because everything was great, and I'm sure things have changed, but we actually, believe it or not, had hundreds, thousands of kids programming. Probably more badly than good. And I think we learned a few things just at the end on what we should do and what we shouldn't do. And I've kind of taken those and tried to kind of build this historical arc so that people can understand on where the things we're dealing with now, where they're coming from, and that they actually have a grounding in both research and practice. But then I also want to talk about some of the changes. And actually looked up what's going on in Canada, and you're not part of the CSTA, Computer Science Teachers Association report of international efforts, but I think it's probably safe to say it's hard to miss today the excitement and the energy there is for bringing coding or programming back to school. Computer scientists, of course, have always complained about that for a long time, and I speak obviously much more in-depthly about the US situation But even, I mean, in the UK last year started a nationwide curriculum, Denmark, South Korea, Israel had it actually for the longest time. So I mean, safety can talk about a global effort, and even in the US, I mean, there's in particular one organization called Code.org, which kind of has promoted the Hour of Code as part of Computer Science Education Week, which you give here in Canada as well. And I'm always, I don't know whether, have all of you seen the video which came out, I think now 2 years ago? The different versions, and this is just a teaser.
Here we are, 2013. We all depend on technology to communicate, to bank, and none of us know how to read and write code.
The first program I wrote asked things like, what's your favorite color? Or how old are you?
I wrote a program to play tic-tac-toe.
I first learned how to make a green circle and a red square appear on the screen.
You're just trying to make something, trying to transfer something from your mind to the computer or to a tablet. It's an experience.
The whole limit in the system is just that there just aren't enough people who are trained and have these skills today.
The programmers of tomorrow are the wizards of the future. You know, you're going to look like you have magic powers compared to everybody else.
Great coders are today's rock stars. That's it.
So that video came out 2 years ago, and what schools don't teach, their longer version, this is a 60 second, there's a 5 minute, a 10 minute, and it preceded Hour of Code, and it went viral within 3 weeks. And so something like that hadn't happened for 20 years. People really weren't interested in programming and education. When you mentioned the P word, it was considered to be too technical. That was not really part. I mean, if you talked about computers, we talked about keyboarding, internet searching skill, privacy skills maybe, but programming or coding wasn't part. And so why is it that this conversation has shifted? I mean, why suddenly do we think that programming or coding is important? And there is, of course, a cry from Silicon Valley about, which also has been going on for more than 20 years, is a lack of diversity, in particular if we look at women, who, when people hear this, that 30 years ago there were more women in computer science than there are today, people find very shocking, but it's actually true. And you know, people sometimes talk about the shrinking pipeline. And then last year, some of the major companies released their diversity reports and found out what we all knew along. It's a mostly white male kind of area. Very few minorities and women who are, I mean, all of them are using digital technologies excessively, but they're not part of actually producing them, they're part of the conversation. And I think that's an important story, but that's not everything, because, you know, this call for new workforces, I think, is always a very tricky one, because do we know in 20 years what those kind of particular skills are? Is programming the one? And it is actually my thinking that we shouldn't focus so much on the future programmers, because realistically, you know, I mean, how many people will study computer science? Maybe we could talk about programming as a more general literacy, the reading and writing of the 21st century. And there's obviously a lot of discussion going on about this. And I'm very fond, I mean, you know, we think about reading, writing, arithmetic, and always add the arts because it has an R in it too, and then programming as a fifth, that we really should think about it more in general terms. Not, I mean, to turn everybody into a computer scientist, because we don't make the same argument about the other area. We don't want everybody to become an author of the right big novel, not everybody a mathematician or an artist. But we think about this really as, I mean, a general preparation for life, and so that students can make informed choices where to go. And so my talk today is about two things only. That's the only two things you need to remember. One of them is, when we think about programming, there's a lot of talk about computational thinking as a kind of new skill. Before it was metacognition, problem solving, and I think this is a good focus, but I want to kind of shift it to computational participation, because literacy isn't just a skill, it's also a practice. And then, in light of the lack of diversity and participation, there's a lot of talk, we need to do this in order to broaden participation, and I agree. But I want to kind of actually shift our attention to what will come after this, that we also need to deepen participation. It is not just about bringing in more, but also making the engagement deeper, more richer in terms of giving people the skills. And so those are the 2 points I want to talk about where I think why kids need to learn programming, and how we can look at this at a literacy. So let me start with the first one, computational thinking, and how we can go from here to computational participation, what that means. Have any of you heard the term computational thinking? Probably here. It's a big buzzword. In 2006, Jeanette Wing, then at Carnegie Mellon, she then went to NSF and is now at Microsoft, wrote a really short paper. I think computer science was kind of in an identity crisis. And she sat down and said, what really is it that's kind of special, what computer scientists bring to the table? And she said, computational thinking involves solving problems, designing systems, and understanding human behavior by drawing on the fundamental concepts of computer science. There's really nothing wrong with that definition. I mean, it explains, when you design, it actually also doesn't mention the word coding or programming if you really look closely. It's more about the ability to use technology to solve problems, to create systems, and I think the understanding human behavior is a really important point. And we actually, in 2009 and 10, and 11 had workshops at the National Research Council in trying to understand what is it, because nobody in computer science agrees on what computational thinking really is. And then also to think about what are the pedagogical applications on how you can teach it. Because what's interesting about this is actually also talking about how computer science has literally infiltrated all other subject areas. We're not just talking about computer science in the sciences. I mean, today, every chemical engineer, chemist, biologist, even in the medical sciences needs to understand. I mean, computing is part of the research process. But even people now talk about the digital humanities. I mean, even there, research has changed because of computation. And so Jeanette Wing's piece really kind of, I think, resonated with something. And it's something which you didn't see. This is in the longer version of the code.org version. It actually starts out with a quote by Steve Jobs. Everybody in this country should learn how to program a computer because it teaches you how to think. And I think we're very enamored of these kind of individualized views. Think about the image of a programmer or gamer or hacker. It's a person who sits in a basement all by mostly himself, communicating with others and, hacking along. There's very little sense of community, and I think when we think about computation, we really should think about it in a broader sense. So most of the time, we really think about literacy or computation in terms of functionality. Here are the basic skills you need to learn. And Sylvia Scribner, who many decades ago wrote a really nice piece, Literacy in 3 Metaphors, says, but in fact, we always have 3 different conversations when we talk about literacy. So there's the functionality, the seduction, but there's also the political, the power part. The reason why we get people to become literate is so that they can participate in the civic process. They have a voice. They can understand why certain science-based discussions or decisions are being made. And then there's a third piece we hardly ever talk. She talks about literacy as grace. And I think about that as literacy as personal expression. You know, knowing how to write a love letter to a woman. I mean, today you don't write the love letter, you craft a 140-character tweet. Or email, but the tweet. But even that, as you know, is a craft. I mean, to be able to express yourself. So, computational thinking is really, mostly, when people talk about, it's about this functional aspect, the kind of skills. But in the end, I think we want to also, along with Sylvia Scribner, who wrote this way before computers came around, she wrote this about what the role of literacy in culture is. We want to think about the political as well as the personal, why it is important to become literate, whether it's about reading, writing, arithmetic, or if you want artistic, and as well as computational expression. And so when I think about coding on why it is important, why it should become a literacy and not just a job skill, is because we have to understand on some level on how these systems are built which you're using every day. When you're raising your iPhone and you press this button, do you understand, how the things behind the shiny case actually function? How the interfaces you're using, and the interfaces are all designed, they can be changed. Companies make decisions about what they allow you to do or not. So the idea is not that you at least understand what is hard and easy. And human-computer interaction, by the way, is one of the hardest things to design. It's not so much coding the machine, it's when the humans get in their way. But then it's also about power. Everything in our life nowadays, whether it's on a personal leisure level, if you look at the business level, at the professional level, and in schools maybe less so, has technology intertwined. So, these interactions, again, are all designed, and where are your voice in kind of making sure that the content is there, content for different communities and cultures, that interactions are accessible to everyone. We have very few systems which are universally designed. And technology is actually one of the few things which makes that adaptability very easy for handicapped. And then on a personal level, when you look at youth, on how they're using technology, but they're using it very superficially. Do they really understand, have the power to use it to the full max? So that's why I'm thinking, or say, that we should, computational thinking, there's nothing wrong with that definition, but I want to kind of cast a wider net and alliance with Sylvia Scribner and many other literacy scholars who have never themselves concerned with technology, but I think they really hit the nail on the head when they understood it's about the functional aspect, and we have lots of discussion in every country on what that means to read and write, to do math, or what you need to understand in science, and so that's a discussion we need to have. But I think we're also having this discussion because we understand the political power of this. Because we make people literate, because we want them to be full citizens. And then I think on a personal level, this has ramifications too, if, like Sherry Turkle and others argue, the architecture of the machine becomes the architecture of our intimacies. When we interface via technology with others, so it's not just about earning money or doing a job, it's also on your personal life and your relationships. And I'm surely not alone, there are many others who have investigated the personal relation aspect of technology. Again, and in order to talk a little bit about where computational thinking and participation comes from, which by the way, computational thinking was first coined by Seymour Papert. If you go and dig through the internet archives of early papers, you will find, I think in 1996 or 8, there was a paper on mathematical thinking where he used this term. And he's, of course, most well known for a book which in 1980 came out, and where he took Logo, which was conceived by Wally Wursak at Bolt, Boronek, and Newman, which was a think tank at the East Coast, and he was a consultant on the project, and what he did, he figured out pedagogical uses. And what you see here is a famous turtle, some of you might remember. And there was actually a physical turtle, which was a big thing connected via big fat cable to a gigantic computer next door, or your room next door. But which introduced object-oriented programming, which by the way now, which was thought for kids, but now has become the industry standard. It's very interesting. And this idea, rather than data structures, we would actually manipulate objects on the screen. And Seymour really saw the potential, not just in terms of mathematics, on how this object could be manipulated, but also how it could relate to kids' bodies. So you could actually play that turtle, so you could become the computer and understand what you were doing on the screen, how it related. And I came on board in the late 80s, and what you see here is one of the few images of Project Headlight in 1985, elementary school, and then what was one of the worst neighborhoods, Jamaica Plain, got hundreds of those computers. And you know, that school was built in the open architecture of the 60s. They didn't know what to do with those spaces, so we ended up making these computers into circles, and they were all hooked up via the internet, which was a really big thing at the time. These were 256K machines in daisy chain networks. And the kids were programming every day. So very interesting idea. And what was happening here, we worked with teachers in actually figuring out ways on how to integrate the computer into the curriculum. So this was not your computer lab, which you still have in many schools, where kids go once a week for 45 minutes. And 20 years ago, the computer lab was locked because these machines were expensive. And then for 45 minutes, you would program a Christmas tree because the holidays were approaching, an Easter bunny hopping because Easter was coming. And then you would go back and do everything else which was not connected. So 20 years ago, we came up with a project where we would think about how can we actually integrate, leverage computation in the service of understanding mathematics and programming. And I want to show you a short excerpt from the video of one of those projects. It was VHS quality.
It's dinner time for parents at the Hennigan School in Boston.
He will ask you a fraction problem. If you get it wrong, you will become mentally disturbed.
I don't know what's wrong with it.
After months of work, the 5th grade students are showing off the computer games they created. Even the principal is here to take a try. The children are using the programming language Logo, invented by this man, Seymour Papert. As part of a bold MIT Media Lab experiment known as Project Headlight, Papert, his research team, and the Hennigan teachers are developing methods to put inner-city children in charge of their own learning. Instead of using purchased software like most schools, Project Headlight challenges the students to use Logo to create their own software.
How did you decide what to put in your messages when you get it right? Well, they're basically all the same. I don't know. I just thought your name cards and what's it was right and what's right. What do you say when they're wrong? That's wrong, trying to get it.
In the design process, they become expert programmers. They draw, manipulate shapes, even guide a skier down the slope. And like all the students, this one is built in a surprise. When the skier hits a bald spot, a fraction quiz. No run-of-the-mill video games. These are designed to teach mathematics. Abigail has chosen to design her fraction game around the Greek myths.
You want to go to the home of Zeus, but the map was ripped up by the Greek god Hades. All the Greek gods and goddesses have a fraction in the map. You're to go to the gods and goddesses one at a time.
Her toughest challenge involves allowing the user to choose an answer from the quiz. She's had to learn the hows and whys of the ifs and thens.
The hardest thing about this is making the program for what your answer is to the fraction problem. Right? If you push A, then you do this, and then if you push B, then this happens, and C, then this other thing happens. So it's really hard.
The fact that a 9-year-old is learning such sophisticated programming concepts is a testament to Project Headlight's success. And for Abigail, the command of the computer allows her to devote her attention to what she really enjoys. Designing a Nintendo-style interface and creating a compelling story around the gods. Ginny has designed her fraction game around a spider web. Like her classmates, she's learned advanced programming. She's also learned the advantage of producing her own game.
Because you make your own game and you can play it anytime you want. But in Nintendo, this right here, you don't have to buy it because you're the one who's making it.
With Nintendo as a model, she's even designed her own game box.
Like at first I didn't know how to
That's the
design
90s,
web.
remember?
And so the art teacher helped me and I designed it.
In fact, as part of the project, all of the children package their games and promote them with an ad campaign. These integral activities make this project unlike any textbook exercise. The students here are designing a real product from start to finish. And through the process, they learn about every advertising medium. They even produce TV commercials.
If you play this game, play it good, you may grow up to be like Ronald Reagan. Wow. Town is awesome. It's spooky, it's scary, and it's exciting. It's by TCA. Awesome.
So I show you this because it's a quarter-century old. You know, very simple machines, lots of spaghetti code, not necessarily sophisticated, but you could see this wasn't just about coding. You had the language arts unit about propaganda built in. The art teacher came along, was designing a box, you know, because 25 years ago you would buy software in very sophisticated 3D boxes. You would go in a store, believe it or not. And you also have a lot of writing, as you can see there, aside from the code. And we developed this at MIT as a model because we realized, looking at all the research and the hundreds of thousands of kids, whether they're programming in Logo, Basic, Pascal, big arguments which language was the best. I don't really think it matters that much. But the idea was to show it really needs to be integrated. It needs to not to be in a lab where you go 45 minutes. It needs to be connected to the curriculum. In this case, kids were actually learning about fractions while they were developing the software to teach younger students in their school. You need to spend extended periods of times in developing big pieces of software, not just short mini programs, to understand the complexity on what you have to do. So this project kind of really leveraged many of the premises. I mean, many look at Mindstorms and Logo just from the technology side, but I think what people forget, this was also a book about pedagogy. I mean, it was actually, I think, more a book about progressive pedagogy, which just happened to involve some technology. And Seymour's, from a perspective of constructionism, there were three tenets which were really important. One of them was the personal, that you build artifacts which represent, which showcase your knowledge and allow them to be shared with others. So it isn't just all in your head. I mean, it becomes instantiated, whether it's an object on the screen like a computer program or that game or a robot or anything. You actually can externalize, can create representations. I mean, Seymour, you know, at that time we didn't have all the verbiage we have in educational psychology about creating representations simulations. Nowadays, people actually agree that, I mean, explaining and representing are very powerful principles of learning as well as teaching. Another aspect which was very prominent in Mindstorms was this idea you just didn't learn alone. I mean, the idea of the learner, people studying books, it was part of a community, and Seymour was very inspired by the example of a Samba school. And why the Samba school?